From the skies to the rails and across the roads, Africa is moving. But is it moving fast enough? Welcome to today's episode of The Business Age. You'll be with me, Naringwa Fiona Mothoni. On this particular episode, we'll be looking at connectivity and transportation here on the African continent, which is really the backbone of economic development. Whether you're transporting mangoes from Kenya to Mali or moving people from Kigali to Morocco, connectivity plays a crucial role. And we'll be speaking to the head of transportation and mobility at the African Union Commission. Thank you so much, Eric, for making time to speak to us. This is really going to be a very informative conversation, even looking at your expertise and the background. You've been in the transport sector for over 20 years. Start by drawing us a picture. When you look at the transport infrastructure here on the African continent, what is the current state?
Thank you, Fiona, for inviting me. First of all, let me say that transport infrastructure in Africa is on the infrastructure. The hard part of it is managed by the countries themselves. So at the country level, you see that the countries at different levels. You find that one country might be prioritizing air transport as one mode of transport. The other one will be looking at road transport, depending on what type of businesses they trade within the countries. But at regional level, there are also some level of integration in terms of building their infrastructure, coming together as countries to build the transport infrastructure. So we basically look at it in the four modes of transport: air, road, maritime, and aviation, like railway. So I can say that it is at different levels, depending on the mode of transport. But at continental level, I can say it is managed under the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, whereby the continent has come up with priority projects. So when it comes to integration, we are not looking at the infrastructure projects that are ending in one country. So we are looking at cross-border transport infrastructure projects. So at that stage, I think we have made some good progress, but there is a lot we can do more.
Even from what you've just said, different countries have different priorities in regards to the transport models, and each country also has its own way of doing things. Then can the continent really achieve an integrated transportation network? What are the challenges? Does this also play as a limiting factor?
The fact that the countries are still, connected through borders. We have borders on each country. We have a customs kind of system whereby each country has its own system they're working on. So it affects many areas on infrastructure generally, not only for transport, but even the connectivity, even on other sectors, not only infrastructure. So the fact that some countries have come together to have regional blocks, I can say that the first challenge is that one of, building a national system versus a regional integrated kind of network. So that is the first challenge. So you find a lot of challenges when it comes, for example, to put together, an infrastructure which will link three countries together, because you have, for example, a procurement system which is different. Each country has its own national procurement system. So you have to have different, contractors, different service providers for each country to build the infrastructure. Even when you build the infrastructure, at operational side of it, you have to have different operators. That is a big challenge. A second challenge I see is that infrastructure really takes a lot of capital costs. When you are building a road project, depending also on the topography, where the country is. So there are different levels of, but the budget and the cost of capital is really a big challenge. And the third challenge I would say here is that the harmonization aspects when it comes to the standards. African countries have been working in different systems in the past, because of the colonial system. You find countries, for example, in East Africa, maybe they have been in a British system whereby they had British standards in terms of building their in this case, let's say road construction, but it's the same case when you go to the railway system. So you find there is a lot of issues in terms of building now a country and Africa standards. So this is one of the challenges African Union Commission we are looking at, to be able to build standards that are common and harmonized. Coming from that past era of colonization and different system.
Okay, and under the African Union Commission, there are efforts as well as strides are being put in place to ensure that there is a seamless transportation connectivity within the African continent. And there is even program for infrastructure development in Africa, it being a flagship project of AUC. What progress has it made, especially when you're looking at the transport sector?
Program for infrastructure development in Africa, as PIDA we call it, was endorsed in 2012 by the heads of state. It's a program, put together to look at how can Africa, have a common framework whereby infrastructure in all the sectors. So it has transport, ICT, energy, and transboundary water. So in all those 4 areas, we had a lot of projects. So countries were doing a lot of projects, approaching partners in, one-to-one without a coordinated effort. So the Africa looked at it and say, the AUC proposed a program which has 2 phases. The first phase went from 2012 to 2022, and the second phase is 2024 to 2034. So the main objective of this is to have a coordinated approach in resource mobilization, because the main challenge, as I said, was the capital cost of infrastructure projects. The second challenge was the harmonization, because you remember we have 8 regional economic communities in Africa. So each REC having countries together, they had a lot of initiatives. So they needed a coordinated approach in terms of, first of all, bringing all the stakeholders together, private sector and public sector, to be able to plan and design and construct these projects. So far, I can say that the first phase, which ended in 2022, had a big number of projects. The prioritization was mainly based on projects which have a regional impact. But it was seen that the progress was not very satisfactory because of one major factor. It was that the coordination in terms of prioritizing projects was still a bit of a challenge. You could see that some projects, progressed very well, but others were left behind because, again, the major driver of this is the countries themselves, because infrastructure is built at the country level. So the PIDA framework through the AUC and the African Union Development Agency, which is the implementing agency of PIDA, was to bring together all the actors. But we saw that there was a lot of weaknesses in terms of making sure that the priorities are still, discussed and well coordinated. I can say that the second phase is really promising because we have 69 prioritized projects. It was a deliberate decision to make fewer projects which can be implemented, which can be monitored easily. Those projects are mainly 60% are transport projects. And we saw that, for example, the road sector, some corridor projects have been advanced very well. I can say that some corridors like Northern Corridor projects or Lapset Corridor, which links South Sudan to Ethiopia and Kenya, has advanced very well. There are some corridors as well in West Africa, like Abidjan-Lagos corridor. There are also others in Southern Africa. So I can say at now we are almost at mid-review time of the PIDA Phase 2, which is going to end in 2034. So I can see that countries are really prioritizing these projects, which is different from what it used to be in the first phase of the program.
To improve connectivity, the Single African Air Transport Market was put in place, commonly known as SATAM. Where is the progress? What has been achieved so far?
Now, the Single African Air Transport Market is a flagship project of the African Union Agenda 2063. It was launched in 2018. It came from the previous decision called the Yamoussoukro decision, which was for liberalizing air transport services. So the main objective of the SATAM is to remove restrictions in air transport. The restriction is in three categories. There are restrictions in terms of frequency and capacity. So, so it used to be like any airline to move from one point to another in Africa, it needed to, to go through a lot of procedures to, to acquire traffic rights, to acquire, to be able to get what capacity in terms of the aircraft needed to be flying from one point to another. So it's a kind of liberalized market that it looks at creating, a market which removes restriction on capacity, on frequency. Frequency means how many flights, for example, per week can Rwanda Air fly from Kigali to Nairobi. So, and the third major restriction was on granting traffic rights. Granting traffic rights is like you can fly from Nairobi to, let's say, Lusaka. Then from Lusaka, an airline from Nairobi can pick passengers and take them to South Africa. So like that is a fifth freedom traffic right. So the single air transport market seeks to remove those restrictions and also create an enabling environment whereby the cost of air travel can be reduced through a fair competition between African airlines.
And how has the progress been so far, especially looking at different countries, as we had mentioned earlier, have different priorities? There's still negotiations, protocols that haven't been signed, haven't even been implemented. So what is the progress and what are the present limitations for it?
The progress so far, I can summarize it in two ways. There is a progress in terms of assigning to it, joining the SATAM, because the first thing to do is to have countries as much as possible, embracing the initiative and be able to come in and work together to, to implement. So that one, we have made a good progress. We have 38 countries out of the 55 countries who have signatory of the SATAM. They are already entered into the journey in terms of implementation. They have signed a solemn commitment. They are working with the African Civil Aviation Commission, which was designated as an implementing agency of SATAM. That was when it was launched in 2018. Then after the joining, the second part of progress, which is to me more important, is now the implementation side of it. On the implementation side of it, I can say that some countries have already made very good progress. The 38 countries which have joined are already constituting around 89% of intra-Africa traffic. Remember, we are looking at creating an enabling environment for intra-Africa connectivity. So we want to increase intra-Africa connectivity. And the contribution of Africa to the global traffic is still at 2.2%, with a population of almost a quarter of the global level. So I can say that countries, we have initiated a program called the SATAM Pilot Implementation Project, which brought together almost 25 countries. And those 25 countries have already started, granting traffic right among themselves. So we could see that those who have already joined and started the implementation, we started to see, for example, more operators coming to an airport. The example I can give you is a country like Zambia. When they joined last year in 2024, they had a lot of new air operators coming to their airports. And with that, they could increase the traffic of passengers coming in. So when they joined SATAM, they immediately started signing what we call Yamoussoukro decision compliant bilateral air service agreements. These are the air service agreements which are removing all the restrictions in line with the SATAM. And they started, providing, possibility for more operators, reducing even, because the more operators you have, a more competitive environment you have, you can also reduce the cost. Because the major challenge, again, is the cost of tickets in Africa. Because a lot of people would wish to fly between one capital in Africa to another one, but they are not able to do it because it's so expensive. But the monopoly and the protectionism of the national carriers is also still a big challenge. So by SATAM, once we have liberalized markets, we have more operators coming in, and they are able to compete and provide a better quality of service and reduce the cost as well.
Indeed, and a lot is really relying on SATAM being a success and also the implementation of it actually happening. But when you look presently, there are still challenges around it. Rwanda, for example, has had to cancel about 3 routes because a neighboring country revoked its license. So when you look at such things that are happening, how best can we move forward? Or where do you see the vision of SATAM? How best can we navigate these challenges?
Yeah, maybe before I can project in terms of the timeline, let me go to the point you brought in, which is very important on the what do we do in terms of operational issues. Because without solving the operational issues between 2 countries or 2 airlines, we will not be doing progress. Because we can have a progress in terms of looking at how many new passengers are we getting into the market, but without resolving those particular issues, we'll not be going anywhere. So one of the thing I can say in this conference we are attending on the African Aviation Stakeholders Convention is one of those aspects where the airlines meet and with the framework of African Airlines Association, they can see how they can resolve those operational issues. Issues related to certificates, operating certificates in terms of the licenses between operators. So this convention is a platform where the airlines meet and discuss. Apart from that, with the African Civil Aviation Commission, as I said, is executing agency for SATAM. So there is a framework whereby airlines are now filing requests of complaints to AFCAC in terms of what AFCAC can do for coordination aspects. Not necessarily the issues of disputes, but even the coordination, whereby, for example, if an airline is applying for a certificate in another country with another airline, AFCAC can come in and intervene and coordinate and be able to resolve those issues. So I can see that on operational aspects we are doing well. Now, in terms of the projection and the time frame, I can say that by 2030, our aim was to have at least 40% of intra-Africa traffic done through Fifth Freedom traffic right. As I said, Fifth Freedom is allowing more connectivity and more city-to-city connectivity, because one airline can fly to another city and pick passengers and take them to another city. So I can say that by 2030, if we can achieve that 40% of Fifth Freedom penetration in Africa, and maybe by 2030 we also have eligible airlines, capable eligible airlines which can really drive the market, I think we'll have made a good progress. But a lot of challenges are still there. One of them, as I said, is the cost of operations. So if by 2030 again, because I can see that we are doing a lot in that sense, but if by 2030 we can have the cost of tickets reduced as much as possible, especially removal of taxes and charges, a lot of charges on the airports, a lot of issues on visa openness. In this conference, we are also discussing issues around visa, so we can make a progress and increase the connectivity, intra-Africa connectivity, have new routes, because as I said, it's very difficult to move between all the 5 regions in Africa.
Very difficult. And now it brings to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. There's a lot riding on it. The continent relies on its success for the continent to be self-reliant. How does connectivity and transportation tie into the success of it?
We recently had a lot of conversation around it. How can we bring transport initiative and projects, including SATAM, to the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area? The first thing I can say, it's not easy to do intra-Africa trade without an efficient infrastructure generally, even before we talk of transport. Because when you talk infrastructure, transport, energy, ICT, telecommunication, they are all it's like a backbone of the trade and intra-Africa trade and businesses. When it comes to transport, it's very critical. The first factor is that in terms of moving, we still see a lot of challenges on logistics when we want to move things from east to west, north to south. A lot of hindrances are still there. So I can say that the more we develop a better and efficient transport infrastructure network, we are able to allow more businesses. But on the other hand, again, on the FCFTA side, there is a lot of things that FCFTA framework will bring to the transport sector. One of them is the reduction of the custom duties and challenges along the borders. If we have like harmonized tariffs and reduced charges and taxes across border, it will also enable us to reduce the cost of transport. So these two programs, SATAM, the highway transport corridors, and even the railway, are very much complementing on FCFTA.
Now, still even looking at the connectivity, if you could break down for us, cost of traveling within the continent in itself is expensive. Someone mentioned they were traveling, I think, from Tunis to Kigali, and they traveled for over 24 hours. So maybe break down for us, why is the cost of air travel still expensive? What are some of the things that are behind it? Maybe for a viewer to get the whole picture of it.
Let me take an example in West Africa. A ticket maybe in Senegal, in country Senegal, maybe from Dakar to Abidjan. The tickets, when you look at the ticket cost structure of it, you could find that most of it, the bigger percentage of it is having a lot of taxes and charges. So the operators need to pay a lot of charges at the airports. There are a lot of, various type of charges, and like airport development charges. They're asking, passenger security service charges. So each country is imposing a lot of charges and taxes, which makes the airlines and the operators, the business very difficult. So they are not really making profit at all. And then that is the end user, the passenger, is the one who pays a lot. So that is on the taxes and charges side. But when you look at also the issue of, for example, repatriation of cost, there is a lot of currency issues. When the airlines want to be paid in another country from where they are operating, they need to have some conversion, some currency conversion into those countries. That's also an element on the cost. But most importantly, I think if you have more connections, if an airline can get more connections, they can fly in many destinations. If they are given traffic rights, they can be able to, to increase their base and increase their capacity and get more revenues. And this will also, impact on the ticket cost.
As you said earlier, Africa only contributes to about 2.2% of the global air traffic, but yet, we're seeing conversations around sustainability, and the continent cannot be exempt. We all have to work as unified as possible to reduce the carbon emissions. So how does green aviation look, especially in the context of Africa?
I can say that globally, Africa should not be left behind. We have some global targets in terms of the CO2 emission. The global target is to have net zero emission by 2050. That was a decision made globally. But Africa has to position itself on how to attain, in a phased approach, whatever has been agreed at global level. So the African Civil Aviation Commission and the African Union Commission put up an initiative on sustainable aviation fuel and other low carbon fuel. This initiative is aimed at looking at the potentials we have in Africa, because SAF is already produced globally, but without producing it in Africa, we'll not be able to achieve the targets. So the targets have been set according to the global targets, but recently we had a strategy. We developed a strategy on SAF. So SAF is mainly based on feedstock products from the agriculture and other oil products, which are put together to produce a sustainable aviation fuel, which does not emit CO2. And the continent has made a strategy to see which country are already having the potential in the environment to produce SAF using the private sector, and be able to maybe push and get to the targets we want to see in the near future. But apart from the sustainable aviation fuel, We have another initiative doing with AFRA to create what we call free route airspace, which is an initiative to look at how can the routes within Africa can be optimized. You use a shorter route and be able to reduce the number of CO2 emitted, even using the normal jet fuel, but you are able to, instead of the conventional route, we're using a performance-based route, whereby you can reduce the travel time, but also reduce the fuel you are using to fly.
Do we know the timeline on when the African airlines could be able to start using the sustainable aviation fuel? And also, what does that mean? Does that mean someone purchasing an air ticket will have to incur extra costs in the name of sustainability, or will the prices have reduced by then?
That's a good question, because the main challenge is actually that the continent is already working on reducing the cost of travel, even in the existing circumstances. But when you look at the SAF, the cost of SAF, it makes the cost of fuel even higher when it is, it is taken from out of Africa. So the first thing to do before we can even talk of to produce SAF is to look at all the elements around it. There is a challenge on infrastructure. How do we connect where you have fuel producing companies, maybe supplying the SAF to the airports? What are the infrastructure challenges around it? How can we reduce, the cost of the logistics around SAF production? For example, a company in Kenya which is doing, the feedstock and they want to produce SAF. What are the what can measures the government is giving to support those companies to produce more SAF? So the faster we'll be resolving those challenges, I think then we'll be able to know that some countries or some airlines can be able to start, flying with using SAF. Yeah.
You've briefly touched on how the African Union Commission is attracting private sector to also come and be involved in investing within the sustainability framework. But now do talk to us, how best can the private sector really be involved, and how can we utilize models such as the public-private partnerships, and are we seeing the investor appetite really keen into coming into the aviation sector?
With the African Union Development Agency, RwandaTV, the AUC has set up a framework to work with the private sector within the framework of PIDA again. And this framework is done through some investment forum. We have what we call Dakar Summit, which happens every year. We also have a PIDA Week, which brings together the private sector. So in those forum and the meetings and the consultative framework, the public sector, let's say a railway agency having a railway project, we showcase, we help the countries to package their project in a way that it can be attractive to the private sector. So we bring those projects into the discussion. So the private sector will come and they are presenting their interests. They are presenting also their criteria, but they are also, development partners are also part of the process. So I can see a lot of progress, especially with the PIDA PAP 2, that we have a lot of PPP coming up, especially in the area of transport, area of corridors, smart corridors, area of ports, upgrading and development as well.
Well, there you've had it. Africa's economic development really depends on how well and how fast we connect. That's all we had on today's episode of The Business Age. You're with me, Naringwa Fiana Motoni. Thank you so much for tuning in.